Harry Harlow has spent many years finding out how the capacity for love and friendship develops in young monkeys.
24 hours a day. They never scold or strike their baby.
Learning to love is a serious business.
Thank you, Dr. Harlow. Thank you, Dr. Harlow. Thank you, Dr. Harlow. Thank you, Dr. Harlow.
Harlow was absolutely monumental in the change in our knowledge and understanding of behavior and development and the brain from where he found it in the early 30s to where he left it in 1981.
"50 years ago, Harry Harlow revolutionized the way we raise our children. He taught us to hold them and to hug them, and in doing so, he became one of America's most celebrated scientists."
These tests give us a new definition of something which is extremely important, something which affects their entire personality, something which we call love.
He found the key because his work showed that this mother-child relationship and bond could really only be described as love.
But in order to teach us how to love our children, Harry Harlow performed some of the most chilling and distressing experiments ever seen in an animal laboratory.
Harry Harlow was infamous for his work on primates, putting them in all kinds of devices that devastated the infants psychologically. What was it deep down inside him that led him to do those things to animals?
But did Harry Harlow have the right to hurt animals to help us? Was the price they paid worth the knowledge we gained? And who was the real Harry Harlow? A brilliant scientist or an unforgivably brutal sadist? Frustrated with his work at the university in Madison, Wisconsin, it was at the local zoo that the young and ambitious Harry Harlow took the first steps in his controversial career. For psychologists and medical researchers, the standard laboratory animal in the 1930s was the white rat. But for Harlow, rats had little appeal. Harlow was spending his time watching orangutans, and as he did so, he became convinced that primates could tell us much more about human behavior than rats ever could.
Harlow just gets hooked. He sees this incredible parallel to human behavior, and it's like goodbye rats. He has to go and try to persuade the university to let him do it, and they basically say, oh, we have an abandoned box factory. If you fix it up, you can have a laboratory. So he does.
Here, Harlow created one of the first primate laboratories in America and began his work to help our understanding of human behavior. For over 30 years, his team included his assistant, Helen Leroy.
Harry Harlow spent a great deal of time in here. When he was in here, the door was always open, unless he was in a serious conversation that he didn't want anyone to interrupt. So we had a very close working relationship in terms of proximity. So he would sit in here at his desk, which was positioned in front of that window this way, and his chair was behind it. I think in later years some people have said, oh, Harry Harlow, I was there and he started doing this research, and I was thinking, oh, that's so terrible. How can he do that? Well, I knew those people, and I don't think they were, I think this awareness has come at a later time, and now it seems so obvious.
Harlow was about to embark on an ambitious and controversial project to prove to a skeptical scientific world what he had come to believe from watching the orangutans at the zoo, to prove that animals can think.
The whole history of psychology, rat-driven psychology at that point, is, oh, no, 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 animals don't think.
Harry was the pioneer in working on something that seemed perverse almost, namely that animals could organize their behavior and learn, and even animals would solve complicated problems in which they had to open a latch and lift a thing and so on, for no purpose other than to solve the puzzle.
For Harlow, proving that animals can think was just the beginning. Now he needed to breed monkeys for further experiments. And when he separated the infants from their mothers to prevent infection, he made another startling discovery.
First of all, the baby monkeys were taken away from the mothers. They were put in these cages with heating pads on them, and they would put a loose diaper in there. Every day you had to take these diapers out that the monkeys had to play with and put clean ones in. But as the monkeys got older, they didn't want to let go of their old diapers. The monkeys just all start crying and rocking and crying and rocking. Well, it was pretty obvious as soon as you gave them the diaper, they would calm down.
He saw something with the monkeys clinging to the diapers that intrigued him.
He decided to take what he was seeing in these monkeys that he knew so well and take a whack at one of the really big ideas, right, which was that love doesn't exist.
This simple, basic reaction made us believe that we could define and measure what had previously been undefinable and unmeasurable. The baby's love for its mother. Baby's love for its mother. Baby's love for its mother.
Now Harry Harlow was eager to study love in a laboratory, to venture into new territory with work that was fraught with controversy, and much of it driven by the principle that the best way to understand the heart is to break it. Maverick American psychologist Harry Harlow had pioneered the use of monkeys for scientific research. He had observed that baby monkeys sought out physical contact and attachment. For Harlow, this was evidence that animals can love. And with this idea, he set about turning the science of psychology on its head.
It wasn't a question of whether or not this attachment phenomenon was real or not from our point of view. The only question was, how do you set up an experiment to see how this attachment occurs? We started designing some type of object that the monkey could cling to.
Now this is the wire mother.
Harlow and his team created two artificial and contrasting surrogate mothers for the baby monkeys.
This is the cloth mother. It is only a wire mother with a cloth cover. We deliberately made the faces different. This has nothing to do with the present experiment.
Having separated the baby monkeys from their own mothers, Harlow wanted to prove that they would choose the soft, comforting surrogate mum with no food over the wire mother with milk. If he could do this, he knew it would transform the way we raise our children.
They have absolute patience. They are available 24 hours a day. They never scold or strike their babies in anger. And we have absolute experimental control over them.
He took wire mother and a cloth mother, and in the simplest experiment, only wire mom holds the bottle, right? Cloth mom's just cuddly, that's it.
And now for the real question. To which mother is there an emotional response?
What they found was that these monkeys spent, 23 and a half hours out of 24 on the cloth mother. There's some wonderful pictures of a monkey when these are side by side, a baby monkey holding on to cloth mom sideways to get the milk, right? Doesn't even want to let go of the cloth mother.
Why exactly is the cloth mother the preferred attachment figure? Well, Harry believed that it was the product of what he called contact comfort.
By proving that contact comfort, or touch, was as important to infants as food, Harlow's findings ran counter to what parents were being advised in the 1950s. This was a cold era for child rearing, a time when physical intimacy was discouraged.
Give the kid the food that it needs, keep it warm, keep it clean, but, don't muck things up by cuddling and so on.
Especially boys. You let them cry, to become men. If you cuddle a boy too much, you might even become gay.
I think it's in large part because of the work of Harlow that led us to see human development in a very different way, and that social contact and physical contact and other things that he showed with his experiments are really critical.
So now it's common knowledge that cuddling and holding and comfort is as important, if, from Harry's point of view, more important.
Now Harlow wanted to put the love between mother and child to the test, and he devised another, more sinister experiment for his baby monkeys.
Let's find out how deep and abiding this feeling of affection of the baby for its cloth mother really is.
What happens when they go out in the world? What do they look like when they have to interact with something else? And they put them just in a room. Bill Mason really designed this with little odd, strange objects, cootie bugs and paper and things to climb on, and said, "Go to, monkeys."
We know that when our own children are taken to a strange place without their mothers, they are often overwhelmed with fear. This room is just such a new and strange environment for the baby monkeys.
If you put cloth mom in, you can see the monkey run to mom. The touch, that ability to cuddle and hold on, had built a relationship and a kind of security feeling. You put wire mom in, same basic mom, the babies stay on the floor crying.
For Harlow, his experiment with the strange environment had been a success. It proved the strength of the bond between the baby monkeys and their cloth mothers. But it was not enough. Now Harlow wanted to push things even further, and created another experiment, one that would terrify the baby monkeys.
Now, suppose that in addition to an environment that is merely strange, we produce one that's really frightening. Really frightening, really frightening, really frightening.
We use fear stimuli a lot because what does a child do when it's frightened? It runs to his mother. The bear with the drum that frightened the monkeys. Well, these monkeys would run to the mother surrogate and hang on. Then once they hung on, then they would kind of turn around and go out and explore the thing that frightened him. Harry loved that. Oh boy, in his speeches, he would say something like, not only did she provide security, she emboldened them.
Security does more than make the monkey confident. It emboldens him. It is as if he knew that his mother would protect and safeguard him. There can be no question now but that this monkey loves its mother.
By now, Harry Harlow had been experimenting on monkeys for more than 20 years. But isolated in the Midwest of America, he had escaped wider attention. This, however, was about to change.
Harry received a letter from Lee Kronbach, then president of the American Psychological Association. And that letter said, "Congratulations, Harry. You can stop being a clinician." In other words, he had been elected president of APA.
Harlow began to prepare his inaugural speech as president of the American Psychological Association. But in deciding to call his speech The Nature of Love, he was taking an enormous risk. Love was not a word that existed in the language of science.
These tests give us a new definition of something which is extremely important. Something which we call love.
Love was not considered a legitimate scientific term in any way, shape, or form. And when Harlow first started talking about this, he's using the word love. Could you be more squishy?
I thought it wasn't really appropriate to describe the relationship between an infant monkey and a claw surrogate as love.
Scientists were just not even comfortable using that kind of a term for an animal. But Harlow actually liked to be a bit of a provocateur, and so he actually went out of his way at times to choose terms that he knew would both aggravate, stimulate the scientific community as well as sometimes the lay public.
Armed with his speech and films, Harlow arrived in Washington for the biggest moment of his career. Before an audience of America's leading psychologists, he took to the stage and began to talk about love.
The people who were there say the room just went silent. This was such a shockingly different approach and so beautifully done.
It startled psychology that somebody would think about studying love in a monkey.
His address got a standing ovation. It was absolutely amazing. And the place was just such a buzz. He talked, he read poems, and he got people laughing. And then on this huge screen, baby monkey's flying through the air like this, lands on the mother surrogate and rubs his chest up against this thing, and then rubs his head against the face of them. Those people just melted. He had the picture of the baby bottle with the monkeys with his arm around the bottle, and his slogan was, "Man cannot live by milk alone."
I think it marks a beginning of really taking emotions seriously and really taking emotions as a subject of scientific study, not just an ephemeral thing that can't really be captured in the laboratory.
Having won his battle with the scientists, Harlow took to the road to spread his message of love to the general public and to make himself famous.
Harry was the great cheerleader for all of this and was in incredibly wide demand. My first year at Wisconsin, I rarely saw Harlow. He was on the road constantly, and he told me that he felt that that was an important part of, in a sense, selling what he was trying to encourage the scientific community to embrace.
But while Harlow was waking the public up to new ideas about love and child-rearing, he was failing to take those lessons home.
Between my dad and I, there wasn't much of a hugging, because that was the way in the 1940s. You know, Dad was kind of supposed to be this distant thing. We were loved and we were cared for, but in that time, you just didn't hug a whole lot with your kids.
But Harlow's determination to prove our need for love came at a heavy personal price. After 14 years and the birth of 2 sons, his marriage to fellow psychologist Clara Mears ended in divorce in 1946.
I think Harry was probably at the lab all the time, and they just sort of drifted apart.
Harlow displayed his own need for contact and love when he married another psychologist, Peggy Kenny, just 18 months after his divorce. But once again, the theories he preached to the world were at odds with his personal life.
My father was extremely busy with his research. To a certain extent, I think it was more my mother's role to take care of us than my father's.
It just seemed perfectly normal to us that people worked all the time. And it's hard to even remember that other people may think that's a little eccentric. If you're smart enough to come up with this brilliant idea, couldn't you at least be smart enough to take it home, right? I mean, what does it say about you that you can't even get it in your own household? You're out telling the world how to parent, right? And then you don't go home and do it well yourself. It was just one of those slap you around moments for me. Get a clue, go home, be nice to your kids. I don't think he was capable of doing that.
Back in the lab, Harlow's research on baby monkeys continued regardless, and it was about to take a more brutal turn. For having established the strength of love that exists between mother and child, Harlow wanted to see what happens when that love is destroyed.
The early work, by comparison, was fairly innocuous, but the later work really had a sort of brutal quality to it.
It went beyond the necessary, it went beyond the reasonable. It was not perceived as good science.
In the late 1950s, Harry Harlow won widespread acclaim for his work with baby monkeys. Experiments that proved a successful relationship between mother and child is based not only on food, but also on physical contact and love. It was work that had made Harlow one of America's most famous scientists.
We believe that our greatest contribution lies in the development of techniques that may be used in the measurement of many kinds of love.
As he piled success on success, he wanted to let those who were ready to write him off early in his career, that he wanted them to know, hey, take a look at me now.
The scientific community was riding high. Research money flowed into laboratories and universities around the country. There was a sense that the Cold War was on. We had to keep up with the Russians on all kinds of fronts. Basically, people looked up to scientists, and Harlow rode that wave.
I used to say to my wife, I think he wants his name up in the sky in neon lights. That's what he's striving for. And so I think that accounted for a lot of his behavior.
But Harlow was becoming a victim of his own success, a man stretched to breaking point by the pressures of his drive for fame.
Whatever it took to feed the dynamo that made Harry Harlow, he was stoking it all the time, like you stoke the engine of a star. And I couldn't even tell you the order. Alcohol, cigarettes, and coffee, or coffee, alcohol, and cigarettes. Those were like what got him through. Almost like a manic thing, maybe, right? He was just all on all the time. And he would go to different universities to give talk and demand a typewriter and a bottle of scotch.
But in his laboratory, Harlow's early experiments were having consequences he hadn't predicted. The monkeys that he had raised using wire and cloth surrogates were experiencing difficulties.
It was so obvious these animals were not socially normal. They would, say, cower in the corner, and they'd rocking, and the others would start jumping on. If they would just stay still, then the other monkeys would leave them alone. But they didn't know how.
Raised by impassive mothers made out of cloth and wire, the baby monkeys had never learned to socialize nor experienced rejection. Sometimes they harmed themselves, and as adults showed no interest in breeding. Harlow responded by creating what he described as the rape rack, on which females were forced to mate against their will.
At that point, I wondered about what he was doing, and I thought it isn't so much that he hates the animals, but I think he wanted to do something that was going to shock.
The disturbed monkeys, forced to breed on the rape rack, simply became disturbed parents. They abused their babies, and sometimes even killed them. Harlow decided to start again, this time raising baby monkeys with surrogate mothers that, like real mothers, were not totally dependable.
One of his most controversial experiments, and most painful, and in its way equally revolutionary, was what, Cloth Mom Gone Psycho, the evil mothers.
The evil mothers looked identical to the cloth models that Harlow had been using for many years. But these mothers were not impassive. Some blasted the baby monkeys with violent jets of air. Others jabbed at them with metal spikes. For Harlow, having established the love the baby monkeys had for their surrogate mothers, this was his way of finding out if that love could be destroyed.
They predicted they were going to get some pretty messed up, sort of psycho monkeys. They didn't really see that. What they saw was babies always went back.
For Harlow, this was a revelation that offered a powerful insight into human relationships. It was proof that however badly a mother behaved, the child would always return to her in search of love.
Just as we know with abusive, real, human mothers, rejecting and often punitive mothers don't indeed produce independence. They often produce exactly the opposite.
Those experiments rewrote the books for abused and neglected kids.
Harlow's work was certainly pioneering, but it was also beginning to raise difficult questions about whether the brutality of his work was necessary or useful.
If we want to find out about humans, all you have to do is walk out the door. If you want to find out what abusive mothers do to their infants, go to the emergency ward. I mean, you'll see, why do we have to make innocents suffer when we can look in our own backyard and see it? It doesn't make any sense. And it's bad science. It's a bad model.
What Harlow and his students did was basically dramatically illustrate the importance of nurture. But the brutality of it, some of the things were just beyond belief, that mothers, fake mothers that had spikes within them, and so that when the distraught infant would clutch the fake mother, these spikes would come out and repel the infant. Even as a scientist, I felt, my goodness, this is excessive even to demonstrate the scientific point that they're trying to make.
Harlow's darker experiments reflected the turmoil he was going through in his private life, as he struggled to cope with the news that his second wife, Peggy, had been diagnosed with cancer.
I remember when he came home from the hospital and told us there was a good chance that she might recover, and his voice broke. It was clear that it was a very emotional delivery for him to make.
She was sort of the person that kept the family together, and it sort of unglued him. He did depend on Peggy. There was no doubt about that.
It must have been devastating for him emotionally. I'm sure that if somebody is already escaping in alcohol, that would be a big one to want to escape.
I felt sorry for him. I felt this guy must be in pretty bad shape to do this to himself day after day, night after night, and so on.
As Peggy's health continued to fail, Harlow slid further into a world of alcoholism and depression.
There were occasional manic periods, but they were pretty brief. Those could be rather frightening, actually.
We do form social relationships.
There were long stretches when he was in very bad shape. During the worst periods, I think twice he went to the Mayo Clinic for shock treatment.
While he was undergoing shock therapy, Harlow was also developing plans for his return to the lab. But again, his professional obsessions would reflect his personal circumstances. He was no longer interested in studying love. Now he turned his mind to depression and despair. It would be the darkest chapter of his career.
I'm sure that his own depression would have provoked also an analytical interest in depression.
Why not? If you are having a problem, why not study it if you're a scientist?
So he comes back with this idea, and they start doing isolation experiments, and they would take baby monkeys and put them in a box where they really couldn't see for increasing lengths of time. And then he went on and built a device that he called, very Harlow-like, the pit of despair.
Basically, it worked by restricting the animal's movement, and he couldn't see a lot, mainly just see up, and it was depressing.
They were basically wedged in there, and he found out that was a depressing experience. It was such an obvious thing. Why would you do this?
At first, the infant monkeys tried to climb out of the pit of despair, but after 2 or 3 days, they gave up and retreated to the bottom. There they remained, totally isolated, for up to a year, as Harry Harlow tried to find the point at which they became psychologically destroyed.
You could see these little monkeys suffer. You could see them give up. If you wonder what a social animal, which these animals are and we are, looks like after a year of no relationship, it's really not a pretty sight.
Even at the time, professionals felt that some of the work had gone to the dark side and were beyond what many people at the time felt comfortable with.
I believed at the time that it pushed the animals too far, and I told Harlow so. There was something about it that seemed to be just too overwhelming to the animal.
For many people, Harlow's response to the suffering of the animals in his lab was just as disturbing.
I was struck by how little empathy Harlow seemed to have for the animals. They were almost like tools in his mind. And he almost seemed to take a perverse delight in tormenting them. And I use that word advisedly. These animals were tormented by the very nature of the experimental design that Harlow and his students used.
I don't think he was deeply interested in the animals as animals. He was interested in what could be done with them and what they could do for him. And that's the way he proceeded.
I never got the impression that Harlow did an experiment that he really regretted. He would write about how hard it was to see some of these monkeys suffer, and that he would limit the number of monkeys he was willing to see in pain. But within those limits, I think he thought he was doing good.
Not only was Harlow comfortable with his work, he wrote about it in language that caused deep concern.
I read the manuscript for one of the first psychological journals, and I read it, and I actually went in to talk to him that morning, and I asked him not to publish it.
He wrote about it in these graphic, compelling, horrific terms, and no one could get him to stop.
I mean, the pit of despair, the rape rack, were not necessarily unethical. They were borderline, but he presented them in a way that made them not only borderline, but just outrageous. Female baby monkeys were not female baby monkeys. They were little bitches. And on a podium in front of a large audience, right? That's not smart.
Harry would not use a benign adjective when a really loaded adjective might serve better. Well, when the animal rights movement came along, some of those words came to haunt him.
For many years, Harry Harlow had been one of America's most brilliant scientists. Now he was about to become one of its most notorious. Harry Harlow's experiments on monkeys had revolutionized psychology, but it was those very experiments that now threatened to ruin his reputation. The America of the 1970s was in militant mood, full of a new sense of rights, responsibilities, and causes.
I think Harlow, in a way, did galvanize the animal protection community. And indeed, in many respects, it was the animal research issue that became the lightning rod of the emerging animal protection movement in the States. He seemed to be sort of a curmudgeonly fellow and was quite ready to brag about his own work and dismiss the concerns of others. So in some respect, he brought the attention on himself.
He was just so very, very honest in his description of what he was doing to the animals that the animal rights movement were able to say, look at this is what is going on.
He enjoyed controversy. He did not back away from it. He enjoyed arguing. Harlow was very blunt and outspoken in how he described his work. He didn't pull any punches, and he described what he saw as he saw it.
Politics was catching up with him. Now we're coming into the 70s, right? Rise of the women's rights movement, rise of the animal rights movement. Harry Harlow, who gets neither, right? So he's like on the defensive a lot, and he's angry. He's worked so hard to be this scientist who did really change things, and now he's getting attacked for exactly what he did to change things.
Harlow responded to criticism by becoming increasingly provocative. On occasions, he would begin a lecture with a photograph of monkeys copulating and refer to it as the Sermon on the Mount.
In the 70s, I saw one of those lectures, and it was quite shocking. I could hear the gasp in the room, and I cringed. I cringed. It was hard to see.
He gave a talk here that was very sexist, and people walked out. It was very sad.
I see that as sort of the, I don't know, the end game of his professional career. Harlow's capacities were starting to slip.
Once again, Harlow's professional difficulties were reflected in his private turmoil. He was devastated when his second wife, Peggy, died of cancer in 1971, a time when alcoholism and Parkinson's disease were already taking their toll on him.
The sort of blurriness of Parkinson's, you know, got wrapped into the blurriness of the alcohol. But I do think that he knew it was slipping away. Harry Harlow, superhero, was like leaving the stage, right?
In science, and perhaps with good reason, there's a what have you done for us lately philosophy. Don't tell me what you did over the last 40 years. Right now, I'm doing the good stuff and you're not. Get out of the way. There were certainly many people who were absolutely ready to put him down or condemn him or to write him off, and certainly ready to push him aside.
Having spent his career establishing the importance of love and contact, Harlow displayed once again how these were deep needs of his own. After Peggy's death, he was unable to function alone and sought the company of his first wife, Clara.
Dad certainly did have that need very intensely to have a companion in his life. And so it does not surprise me that he renewed his correspondence with Mom.
Harlow remarried Clara just 8 months after Peggy's death, and together they moved to Arizona. But for Harlow, leaving behind the place where he had spent over 40 years building his life and career proved a difficult wrench.
He really faded out. As soon as he left Wisconsin, he was just a shadow. Really, it's like his whole motivation for life was just gone. He should never have left Wisconsin.
After suffering a stroke, Harry Harlow died in Arizona in 1981. But the legacy of Harlow's work is still with us today. For some, it's the legacy of a brilliant scientist who helped us understand a child's needs.
I firmly believe that Harry Harlow is one of the top, if not the top, psychologists of the 20th century. He uniquely used his research with rhesus monkeys to discover basic aspects of behavior and personality that underlie the human spirit.
For others, it's the legacy of a brutal sadist, a man whose cruelty helped pave the way for the animal rights movement.
Harlow did show us that animals are emotional and they can suffer, yet Harlow is the sort of quintessential example of, well, if these animals are so much like us, do we really have the right to do these things? Particularly the sorts of things that Harlow did.
Let's not take away the complicated nature of who he was, right? And the really murky things. But you have to remember that he also did some really good stuff. I was glad to be a mom in the post-Harlow world.